Coming up on the Elmore Leonard podcast is Stacey Sher. Stacey is one of our great film and television producers. A few of the things that she's produced include Heretic, Walk Among the Tombstones, written and directed by Scott Frank, Contagion, directed by Steven Soderbergh, Along Came Polly, Erin Brockovich, Man on the Moon, Django Unchained. She was the executive producer of a little independent film called Pulp Fiction. And most important for this podcast, she produced Get Shorty, Out of Sight, and Be Cool. It was so much fun getting to talk to her. Please enjoy Stacey Sher. Stacey, welcome to the podcast. We've had a lot of folks on who know Elmore well, who've worked with Elmore. We were lucky enough to talk with Scott Frank and Michael Siegel and some other great novelists, but we haven't talked to any producers of any of his movies. You are responsible for producing two of what many consider to be the best Elmore Leonard adaptations, Out of Sight and Get Shorty. And so it's a thrill. It's an honor to have you on. We're really excited to talk to you today.
I'm so excited to be here. I loved Dutch, and I love his work.
I want to start with Get Shorty, which is not just one of the best adaptations of his work, but it's a perfect movie. But when it was made, he had been a best-selling author for a little while, and there were some adaptations that were okay, but for the most part, the adaptations of his work didn't work. Now it seems like a no-brainer, but at the time, what was it like getting that movie off the ground?
Well, it's a great story how it even started, and I don't know if Scott told you that, but Scott Frank is my oldest friend that I've known in the film business. I met him when I was 21 years old in my first week of work, and I knew that he was a huge fan of Elmore's and of his books. Danny DeVito and Barry Sonnenfeld were very close because Barry had been Danny's cinematographer on Throw Mama from the Train. They had stayed super close when Barry became a successful director. Barry called Danny up in the early days of Jersey Films and said he had been bumped off an airplane and he had bought Get Shorty as a paperback in the airport. And he said, "I'm going to send you this book. I really liked it. I think you should read it." And Barry called back about 2 weeks later and said to Danny, "What did you think of the book?" And Danny said, "I bought it." And Barry said, "Well, have you read it?" And he said, "No, Barry, we bought it. We acquired the book." And that became our journey on it. And we talked to, and the first person I went to adapt it was Scott, but as he always is, he's like ridiculously busy and has multiple things stacked up and has people angry at him because he's late in delivering and all of those things. And, and at that point, we'd probably been friends for 6 years or something like that. And I said, "Look, I may never work on another Elmore Leonard novel again. I know how much you love Elmore. I'm just going to send it to you," because weirdly, it was one that he hadn't read yet. And I'm going to send it to you. And he said, "I'm going to New York. I'll take it on the plane with me." And he was taking a red eye. At 6:00 in the morning, my phone rang. And can I curse on this podcast?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, on an Elmore Leonard podcast, of course, you should be able to curse. But I picked up my phone at like 6 a.m. or 6:30 in the morning when he had finished the red eye. And I just heard Scott Frank saying, "Fuck you." And it was because he knew he had to do it.
Yeah.
And so the adaptation itself took a while because, as you mentioned, and I'm a big 52 Pickup fan, so
Sure.
I really liked that adaptation. But Dutch's books are really deceptive from an adaptation standpoint, and everything is great. And also there is an important piece of the mystery in almost every scene. So if you don't combine those things, you can't really hold it into the amount of time that you need to make a feature film. So we spent a lot of time talking about theme and why Chili resonated with people. And it sort of came to this idea of his love of movies, which, Scott and I talked about so much because we're such movie fans. And so honestly, there are things that I can't remember if they're from the script or if they're from the book.
Yeah.
I just know that the studio head character, based on my late friend Laura Ziskin, got cut out of every version of both Get Shorty and its sequel, and she was in both books. She was also in Be Cool. But the idea of this outsider who truly loved movies and in a weird way was the most honest person in Hollywood. It was the touchstone for us that he was the most honest guy in Hollywood. A crook was the most honest guy in Hollywood.
That's great.
And so I think then we began the process. We developed it at TriStar, who chose not to make it. And then we had to package the movie. It's okay. They also didn't make Reality Bites and Pulp Fiction at that same time period. So they passed on all three of those movies. And MGM, run by Mike Menschel at the time, picked it up. And it really became cast contingent. Like, who were we going to put together? We knew that Danny was going to play the character that was rumored to be based on Dustin Hoffman. And we went through several, and I don't know if you guys have spoken to Barry Sonnenfeld, but his book has a hilarious anecdotes about him waiting to have a meeting with Warren Beatty about playing Chili Palmer at the Bel Air Hotel. And I just remember we were all out, which obviously didn't happen. Pulp Fiction hadn't come out yet. I thought that John would be great for the part. We got MGM to sign off on the idea of John as long as we surrounded him with cast, because remember, it was pre his comeback. It was like those two movies together became the 1-2 punch that brought John back 100% to, his huge stardom again. And we put together a read-through, and Gene Hackman did the read-through.
Oh, wow.
And didn't think that he was funny, but he was great. And I think Renee was in that read-through as well. And of course, the character that Bette Midler plays was not in the book. She was just referred to as his widow who held the rights, and Scott put that whole entire part into it. And when Gene was on board, the movie was greenlit.
So it was Gene Hackman that got it greenlit, not...
The combination of John and Gene together.
Wow. I want to backtrack just a little bit. You said you knew Scott was the person for it. Why and how?
I mean, he loved Elmore.
Yeah.
He was great at adaptations, and even then he was one of our greatest working screenwriters. Now he's like legendary that there was a podcast called What Would Scott Frank Do, and he had a New Yorker profile written about him. But then he was one of my best friends and one of the best writers working, who loved Dutch and would put in the time to figure out how to crack the code. And it took a lot longer to get the script of Get Shorty than it did to get the script of Out of Sight, because he had figured out the secret of unlocking it, which was this thing of not getting seduced by the scene, but looking at what information and how you could combine them. Because every scene's great in Elmore's books.
Yeah, and he talks very openly about thinking about his chapters as scenes. His books are inherently cinematic, but adapting them is really, really tricky.
But I think that's because he wrote without an outline, and we would talk about it a lot. He would have the incredible research that Greg would give him, or if there was a block of, I remember discussing this with the two of them. If there was like a character was going to be a landscaper, he would, in Miami, he would send Greg on a journey to figure out every plant that he would encounter in a 2-mile stretch in Miami if you were a landscaper.
Right.
So he would have character ideas, character names, and he would go where the characters took him. And Scott kind of writes like that too. So, but he is also a structuralist. And so we kept dialing back and looking at how long. I feel like it took us a while. I can't exactly remember how long it took us to develop the script, but it definitely was twice as long as Out of Sight took. And I remember spending a lot of time talking about movies about people wanting to make it in Hollywood and the desperation. So we talked about Day of the Locust, we talked about The Bad and the Beautiful, we talked about lots of, Sunset Boulevard, and all of those things thematically informed everything about it and getting things done. And Scott and I had an experience with some people that I won't go into any more detail, but our joke was we felt like we were making a movie with the limo guys from from Get Shorty.
It's such a wonderful movie. After Gene Hackman passed away, I went and watched it again. He is so funny in it, and which you don't expect. I don't really remember him being that funny in any other movie. Everyone is wonderful in it, and they're all playing. It's funny thing about John Travolta wasn't in demand at that time, because when I think of John Travolta, I don't think of Grease or Saturday Night Fever. I think of Get Shorty.
One of the great things that John did when he was in his wardrobe fittings was he sort of showed the difference between how Vinnie Barbarino walked, how Tony Manero walked, how Vincent Vega walked, and how Chili Palmer walked. Because John is a very, he creates his character from the outside in. So it's clothing, walk, movement, because he's this incredible dancer. So it was, and I think the costumes that Betsy Hyman put him in, those 3-button Henley sweaters and the suits, and he was very dapper.
He looks like a modern version of an old time movie star in that movie, and in other movies, but really in Get Shorty. But he it took him a little while to say yes, and he actually passed on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how did he, like, what was he thinking?
Look, I can't say what he was thinking. I know that I did ask Quentin Tarantino to call him because he was a fan of the script to get him to not pass. I know his agents worked very fervently because they knew that this was a great 1-2 punch with the two movies. And look, he was going to pass on Pulp Fiction too. So it's and ultimately Scott, Danny, and Barry went to go meet with him, and they had a great meeting and put it over the top, and then he was completely on board. And interestingly, my memory is, and I don't know if Scott's is different or Barry's is different, was that James Gandolfini was recommended by Gene Hackman.
Really?
Because they had worked together on, I think, Crimson Tide.
Yeah. It's funny. You do. I didn't even think about it, because when I think of that movie, I think of the movie stars, in it. And and by the way, one of the great actors just happens to be in it too. Was there a moment in the process of making Get Shorty when you knew it was? Was it at that reading when you knew it was going to work, or like when did you know you really had something special?
I think we knew from the beginning. I think we knew we had something special because of the script, and it was mind-blowing to us that everyone didn't get it. And there's always this thing, the rules of, nobody wants to make Hollywood movies, or nobody wants to, and The Player was a cult classic. It wasn't a hit, and you're making a more mainstream movie. We just thought that it was fun.
Yeah.
And the only regret that I have about that movie is one of my favorite scenes that Scott wrote is, you can only see it in like DVD extras, if anybody looks at DVD extras anymore. And it was really because it was not 100% shot properly, which is why I didn't cut it. But there's a scene where Chili Palmer goes to visit Harry Zim on the set. And Ben Stiller plays a just out of film school director. And there's a great speech that Scott wrote about why people connect to movies.
Yeah.
And that's something that I always it's just a great piece of writing where he gives a speech.
Will you do it for us?
It's essentially, he says to him, Pick and Save, which is, was a discount store. And he said, I was at the Pick and Save the other day, and this woman said to the cashier, did you see the new Barbara Streisand movie? And she said, oh, yeah. Oh, my God. The way she looked at him at the end when she brushed his hair out of his face. And he says, what she didn't say was, did you love the way the 50 millimeter lens looked on the crane as they boomed down? Film is about emotion. Now get off that crane and show me fear is an emotion. Show me some emotion. And even on a cheesy, I feel like it was like an alien exploitation film that Harry Zim was making.
Yeah.
It was this great scene. And there's a joke in the movie where Gene actually says the actor won't work nights. And in Gene's contract, he would only do one night. And that was the only night that he shot. And we ended up not using it. So
I would have loved to have seen that, but just as a fan of the movie, I didn't think that Harry Zim was working much. And so I think it would have changed how I looked at Harry.
I think what was important about that scene for me is,
yeah,
for Chili, Harry might have been whatever Harry was, but like him, he loved movies and he made movies. And
yeah,
the scene shouldn't have been shot objectively and should have been shot subjectively. Chili's POV, watching Harry make movies and seeing the love that Chili has for this process and why he's going to stand up for Harry,
yeah.
because he's doing what Chili thinks it would be great to do.
Well, how do we get it back in the movie then?
You can't. It's. But Ben was great as like sort of a punk film school student. He was like wearing overalls on a crane. It was great.
That is amazing. I had heard, I think I'd read the anecdote about Gene Hackman only wanting to do one night, and then it wasn't in the movie, and he was maybe not thrilled about it, but
Gene, I don't know if I think Barry does tell this story, but I was there when it happened. At the premiere, it was either the New York premiere or it was a tastemaker screening, and it was at at MoMA. And after the screening, Gene walked up to Barry and said, I have to apologize. While we were making the movie, I didn't think you knew what you were doing, and I really could have given a much better performance.
I think it turned out great.
Yeah.
I think he was...
And he was doing a version. There was this guy who had been a producer who then had a restaurant column. His name was Jay Weston. And it was like Jay Weston's Restaurant Review used to come out as like a paper newsletter in the 80s, I think it was. And he wore those sort of Dickies and like safari clothes. And I feel like that legacy of Harry Zim is alive in Bryan Cranston's character in The Studio. He dresses very much like Gene did in the movie.
What do you think of that show? I'm just curious.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's so well written. It's so much fun. I know that people say that there are a lot more references to the player, but I definitely feel the absurdity of Get Shorty in it.
Oh, for sure. For sure. You're one of my favorite kind of producers because it feels like you can produce anything. And,
Thank you.
and that to me is like, I think it's the best. Jersey Films was a place that produced all kinds of movies. I mean, Get Shorty and Out of Sight, but also Gattaca, which is like one of my all-time favorite science fiction movies. A little movie called Pulp Fiction. Like all of these like different kinds of movies. Reno 911, and you helped start that company. So like, what was it like starting it, and how did that come about?
Well, Fred Spector, Danny DeVito's agent, partnered Michael Shamberg and Danny, and I was one of the first people that I was the first person that the two of them hired. And I had worked for Deborah Hill and Linda Obst for 6 years out of graduate school. And it was during that time when we first were on the Paramount lot that I became friends with Scott and a whole group of writers. And the great thing about it wasn't so great for my career at the time to be what you've described, because it would have been a lot simpler if I was, the gal who liked action movies or the gal who liked romantic comedies. And, you know, it was a time of real genre in Hollywood movies. And so I think it was confounding that I was very filmmaker driven, not to Danny and Michael, and I became their partner after Pulp Fiction, but confounding that um, that I didn't just want to, and Danny didn't want to just do whatever the next, I mean, it would have probably made our corporate partners and our life easier at Columbia and TriStar if he would have done something that was more like Twins for them.
Mm-hmm.
But the company was always about supporting new voices and filmmakers. And so Reality Bites started as an idea that Michael Shamberg, who produced The Big Chill, said, what are people in their 20s doing now? Because it was about his 20s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I came, because I was closer in age to the people involved, at that point, I guess I was still in my 20s when I started working there. Helen Childress and I worked really closely, and then Ben Stiller came on board, and originally his character that he played, and it was his feature directorial debut. And Danny was able to offer, and the same was true for Tarantino, was able to offer the protection because we were Final Cut producers. Now, Final Cut is like a thing you never want to use, but you have it there to protect your vision. And so the same for Andrew Niccol, who had wanted to direct The Truman Show, and it had been taken away from him. So when he wrote Gattaca on spec, he met with many people, but we were the right home for him because he knew that we would protect his vision and protect his ability to do his directorial debut. The same for Zach Braff on Garden State, Todd Graff on Camp. That was part of our mission statement, right? And then we always wanted to make, because film is a popular art form, right? So we always were interested in making the most commercial versions of movies. Now, of course, more people have seen Gattaca now because they show it in science class than saw it at the time it came out. But we always thought it was social science fiction about the human condition.
Yeah.
And Reality Bites was always something that we thought was more than just, a trifle about a generation. And it was a coming of age story told about women, which was really unique at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So we were very blessed because of Danny's position in the industry that we had something at the time called a discretionary fund. So we bought Get Shorty, the book, out of our discretionary fund and then flipped it over to TriStar when we were putting Scott on. But Pulp Fiction was paid for out of our discretionary fund. We began the conversations with Tarantino before he'd even shot a frame of footage on Reservoir Dogs. He had offices there very early on. Helen Childress had offices. We had developed a script with Brad Bird that never got made. He had offices at the Jersey Films office. Lawrence Bender prepped his other movies outside of Tarantino in our offices. And John Glickman, who runs Miramax now, was a Stark intern for Lawrence and worked out of the Jersey offices too. So, and of course, Pam Abdi started as our, the co-chair of Warner Brothers, started as our intern from Emerson, and then was Danny's assistant, and then was president of the company when the company ended. So
that is wild. I still remember the trailer for Gattaca, and I still think about and I don't actually know if it's true that you lose 500 million cells a day, but it's terrifying, and especially now, like with all the
surveillance,
all that stuff. I think about that movie a lot. Another movie I think about a lot, and I would love for you to talk about The Fisher King, which it's not an Elmore movie, but it's one of my favorite movies.
So Richard is my other oldest friend that in the film business, and I met him not that much longer after I met Scott. And in fact, they're both really close friends now because I introduced the two of them.
Oh, nice.
Um, yeah, there's like a whole posse. I always liked my friends that I knew would like each other. So Richie was a young writer who wrote that script on spec.
Hmm.
Steve Rabineau, his agent at the time, sent it to me because he had represented another writer that I was working with at Hill Obst, named Darren Starr. Maybe you've heard of him. He
Sure.
hadn't. It was just after this that he said, "I really want a swimming pool. I'm going to go write a pilot for Aaron Spelling," that became OG 90210. But the studio had wanted us to replace Darren on the script that he was writing for us, and I said, "It's your notes. It's not Darren. Let's do another pass with him and let's drill down on the notes." And because I was very protective of him and his voice, because it was a spec script that we had bought, Steve sent me The Fisher King.
Hmm.
And, Linda fell in love with it also right away. But I said, this is so special. This is some of the best writing I've ever read. And so we bought the spec and started developing it. For a brief minute, for a hot second, James Cameron was going to direct it.
Interesting.
And it moved, our deal was at Disney at the time, and it became clear they weren't going to make it. And then that movie moved over to TriStar and Turnaround. Robin came on board, but was also, and I feel like Terry and Robin may have come together. I can't say enough good things about Terry Gilliam, who was so kind and generous to me. And, I learned so much on the set of that movie, and it was and the development process was great, and drilling down, it was funny. There was the sequence that I believe, and it's funny because Richard did a similar thing for us on Erin Brockovich, but he was uncredited for it. But there's a scene that we started referring to as the famous unwritten scene, which is the scene where Mercedes says, "What did I get?" when Jack says, "You got something out of it." And that scene didn't used to exist. And she talked about, why she did what she did, and because she loved him and all of those things. And I really, and in Aaron, Richard wrote a scene for Julia Roberts' character that was about, similar thing where she talks about, if you want to be like all the, up in Hinckley, I've got people who respect me. And I feel like both of those moments are what he'll sometimes refer to as giving a character their aria. And I feel like both of those beautiful pieces of writing were crucial in both those actors winning Oscars.
That's tremendous. You'd mentioned Terry Gilliam, who such a wonderful director. Started off with Monty Python, directed Time Bandits, Brazil, 12 Monkeys, and more. This is probably my favorite movie of his. Is there something you could share that you picked up from being on set with him?
Yeah, I mean, you know, originally in the script, the scene where Robin Williams is following Amanda Plummer through Grand Central Station, which, Deborah Hill really taught me no is not an option. And and at that time, obviously, being lit for at Grand Central Station at night was a much tougher thing than with lighting technology that we have now. And we brought in these, I feel like they were called muscolights, that are the things that high school football stadiums use to light up fields.
Oh, wow.
And it had to be trucked in, I feel like, from Pennsylvania and put in the window to make it look like daytime because we were only allowed to shoot at night.
Yeah.
I shared, because I had been the music supervisor on this film that we made called Heartbreak Hotel before, they had me kind of performing some of those same duties to save money. And originally Van Dyke Parks was going to write a waltz, and we just never got it. And of course he's the great Van Dyke Parks, but the tempo kept speeding up, and we couldn't afford to have a choreographer and dancers because just having 1,000 extras was a fortune.
Yeah.
And ultimately, even playing the Waltz of the Blue Danube for people was not enough for people to know how to waltz. Somebody for the whole night just called into a microphone, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But it originally there was a woman who was busking in Grand Central that started singing. And that's what was the trigger into Perry switching into this sort of fantasy life and seeing her in this incredible way. And Terry had this idea that everybody would start dancing, and had this idea of nuns and Hasidic men, and of course he had the nuns in a habit looking like they did in The Sound of Music as his own in-joke, because Amanda Plummer's father is Christopher Plummer, from The Sound of Music. But it became this magical thing about, for me, one of the things that I learned is how a visual can transcend an idea that's on the page, because ultimately we're a, a visual medium.
That is so cool. Yeah. If anyone hasn't seen that movie, I think it is. I also think it's one of Jeff Bridges' best performances. It's such a fantastic movie. So another perfect Elmore adaptation is Out of Sight. Once you started making progress on Get Shorty, and did you go back to Elmore and like go through the catalog, or like how did that
No,
come
Out of
about?
Sight was a new release. So we got it in galleys and we bought it. Dutch sent it to Michael Siegel, and Dutch sent it to us before it was published. And we took the package of Scott and the book to Universal, who bought it, and that really began Jersey's New Deal at Universal. Barry was an executive producer. It didn't speak to him the way that Get Shorty did, and so Scott and I developed the script, worked really closely on it. There was this thing that when we got closer to making the movie that I'll talk about in a little bit, which is the Michael Keaton character, who, one of the things that, and it's funny, Elmore and I talked about it a bunch. Sometimes there were character names where he had an idea that the characters were in other people's, Elmore Leonard universe.
Yeah.
And sometimes there were just names he liked.
Right.
So he liked the name Karen Sisko.
Mm-hmm.
And Karen Sisko, and he liked the name Ray Nicolette. And Karen Sisko was the character that's Jackie Brown in the movie's bailiff in the book of Rum Punch. And of course, Ray Nicolette is one of the stars of Rum Punch. And Karen Sisko is the character Jennifer Lopez plays in the movie. And her boyfriend is a DEA agent named Ray Nicolette. Mm-hmm. He only appears, I think, for 2 scenes in the book and the script. And at that point, Jackie Brown was being made as well. And I went to both Soderbergh and Tarantino, and I said, guys, I think it would be really cool. Quentin, of course, gets to cast him. He's the star of his movie. But will you help talk the actor into playing the character? I said, because, we've had a great success with Elmore already and Get Shorty. We made Pulp Fiction together. You're about to go into the Elmore world. I don't want this kind of catty thing of people comparing. I want us to be able to say it's Elmore Leonard's world and we're all just playing in it. And so they both directors agreed. I think Steven didn't really think I was going to get them to do it. And I will say there's a certain person from Miramax that was trying to block it at the last minute, and Tarantino pushed it through and made sure that the sunglasses and I think it was the leather jacket that he wore in Rum Punch and Jackie Brown was sent to us so that we could use it.
That's amazing. How did Soderbergh get involved? And
I mean, honestly, Casey Silver, who was running Universal at the time, suggested him. He had really loved him, and he'd done 2 small films with him before, and he knew that Steven always talks about, when he was making The Underneath, that there were two kinds of directors who love directing and directors who hate directing, and he had started out as the former, and he found that on the underneath he had become the latter. And so he had taken a bit of a break and had done these two experimental films. And he said that he kind of had to become an amateur again to love being a professional again. And, I think he made some joke like, I hated the script and I had written it, it was something like that. And we met with George came on board first, Clooney. And George, Danny, Michael, and I interviewed filmmakers. And the second Steven came in, we were like, it's him.
How did you know?
We shared a language of cinema grammar of what we thought was appropriate for the film. We all talked about Hal Ashby's The Last Detail. We talked about, color. We talked about romance. We talked about, he talked about, I've learned so much about cinema from Steven, more than probably anyone else, because he analyzes it. He's like the greatest professor you could ever hope to have. And he did a thing that he continued to experiment with later in Traffic, but and played with different colors of film stock. We used Ektachrome in the flashbacks when they're in prison, so that imperceptibly the audience understands every time they see that, they make the connection. You may not be telling them, but again, that's relates back to what Terry said about, film being a visual medium.
We did like a little deep dive into Out of Sight, and
With Scott?
no, actually, just I mean, we certainly talked to him about it, but
Did he tell you how he yelled at me when Don Cheadle would ad lib and he would see it on the dailies and he'd be like, he can't ad lib.
What was he ad libbing?
He ad libbed a bunch of stuff, but the one ad lib that I actually made sure, or the one mistake, and Dutch's dialogue's so precise.
Yeah.
And the one that and the other thing that I learned from Steven was like that every director directs for a different value. So there are things that they're looking for that matter. And in the scene where Dennis Farina and Jennifer Lopez, when you kind of first meet the character and he gives her the 6 hour for her birthday, and she says, thanks for the gun, Dad. And a few times she didn't say Dad. And I kept saying, it's only funny when she says, thanks for the gun, Dad. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It's just thanks for the gun. So it's that precision that I was always watching for. And, fortunately, Steven's the most collaborative and gracious and wonderful filmmaker to work with. And, and he said, thanks for telling me, because I'm listening for something else. I'm looking for something else. And I want the dialogue to feel authentic. I want it to feel real. But I'm missing that layer, and encouraged me to keep looking for that to make sure we weren't missing that.
Oh my God. Well, thank you for doing that. You mentioned George Clooney was on board, but so many, Jennifer Lopez had not become, I mean, all these other great actors, I mean, Albert Brooks was Albert Brooks. But pretty much everyone else was, even George Clooney, I mean, I think he had done The Peacemaker, but he was really a TV star at that time, and he wasn't a movie star. How did that casting process evolve? And maybe just share a little bit about that, because like Get Shorty, these are all movie stars doing movie star things. And in Out of Sight, it's people like who are just, they're all ascending at the same time, and it's spectacular.
Well, look, I have to say, I wish I had the tapes, the casting tapes from Out of Sight. Every giant female star, probably with the exception of Julia Roberts, went on tape. Everybody wanted that part because she's a great part. And there was a specific thing that Soderbergh was looking for, and he and George fought for J-Lo to get the part. And they just felt that she really had it, and obviously Dennis we'd worked with before in Get Shorty, and we knew that he could totally nail Elmore's vibe.
Sure.
Francine Maisler cast Out of Sight. Steve Zahn's character was originally going to be Owen Wilson, and he became unavailable. And I feel like Francine and I had done Reality Bites together and suggested Steve. I can't remember how Don got involved, but we all knew and loved him. Um, Albert actually replaced did we do a reading? I feel like we may have done a read through of Out of Sight also, and I believe that Gary Shandling was the original person who was supposed to play the
Wow.
Ripper. And then we kind of had a really hard time, and my friend Rick Yorn had a friend who played college football. Rick is now like a huge Hollywood manager, but and I'm sure he even managed Leonardo DiCaprio then, but that's how we cast White Boy Bob. We read a bunch of football players because we felt that it really needed to feel authentic when he trips and all that happens.
Both Get Shorty and Out of Sight, there's changes from the books.
Again, you never met Ripley.
Right. And
here's a little hot tip.
Yeah.
The safe combination where his toupees are, Scott Frank's birthday.
Does Scott Frank wear a toupee, though, is the question.
He does not. He always had a giant, luxurious head of curls.
Oh, my God. What a guy. Was it similar in terms of knowing that you had something with Out of Sight that, like, was it similar to Get Shorty that it was like, let's just not mess this up? Or
I mean, I would say here's the way that we messed this up, okay? Everyone liked the movie so much at Universal that when this film, Meet Joe Black, wasn't ready to come out in the summer, they suggested moving us up. And none of us had ever had a movie come out at Christmas or in summer where it was going to be a huge ad spend. And we were like, yeah, we're going to be a Christmas movie. And they kept saying counter programming. And that's when I didn't really understand counter programming then as I understand it now. A small action film versus a big action film is not counter programming. A chick flick versus an action movie is counter programming. So, unfortunately, we got lost in the summer and it was tough, and it's a movie that people remember more, and it did much better internationally than it did domestically. Obviously, it was incredibly well reviewed. Scott was nominated for an Oscar. Anne V. Coates was nominated for an Oscar, as she should have been. That began the relationship with Soderbergh and David Holmes, the incredible Irish composer and DJ. Yeah, it was tough because it's one of the best movies I've ever made, and it didn't find its audience at the time.
Do you feel like it's found its audience now? Because I don't know many people who haven't seen it.
It's a real film bro movie that film bros have seen. I don't know if people have widely seen it. It's not like weirdly like we made this movie called Along Came Polly, and I feel like everybody's seen that. Of course, it was a hit when it came out, but it's like back on Netflix and everyone's talking about it again. I know that it endures and it stands the test of time. And I think largely that has to do with the texture and longing. And we talked to, Scott and Elmore and I spent a lot of time talking about this sort of notion of out of sight, out of mind, because in a book, you're inside of characters' heads, so you know that they're thinking about each other. And that's a greater challenge when you're on screen. So we had to put in those near misses.
Sure. And also there's the fantasy, sequence, which is not in the book, which works wonderfully.
And I don't think Hajira is in the Sam Jackson character, and it was so wonderful that he did that as a favor, because Sam was actually originally supposed to play the part in Get Shorty.
Which part?
Delroy Lindo's part.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. I mean, I love... Have you seen Sinners?
Yeah, of course.
Like, he pretty much steals that movie. Like, he's so good, and it's nice that he's between that and the Five Bloods. Like, he's wonderful.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy, Delroy. I made a terrible movie with him in Minnesota called Feeling Minnesota.
I'm in Minnesota right now.
Oh, my goodness. Well, fortunately for you, it is not. Well, climate change works if you're living in Minnesota, because I remember like it didn't go above 50 degrees until May when we were there.
Oh yeah. It's August, and I mean it's 70s, which is nice.
Delightful.
It is. It is not too shabby. Okay, so you produced Get Shorty, Out of Sight. You were an executive producer of Pulp Fiction, but you did not work on Jackie Brown, based on Rum Punch. Was that just a timing thing, or?
Yeah. I mean, we made a deal with Tarantino and his then producing partner Lawrence Bender on Pulp Fiction. After Reservoir Dogs, they both had deals. Like Lawrence had offices and stuff. So I mean that, and we always believed in, before credit proliferation, there was a real honor and legacy to the executive producer credit.
Mhm.
And when financiers started taking that credit, when studio heads started taking that credit, when managers and, you know, spouses and all kinds of people started taking all different credits, because they're not dictated by a guild
Yeah.
or a union. I think you saw a real devaluation of it, but we perform the services of executive producers on Pulp Fiction.
Which I would love to talk to you about, but I do want to get back to some of these other ridiculous things, unless you want to
For
share
another
anything.
time, let's talk about Dutch.
Okay. I totally forgot to ask this question. Was Get Shorty the first Elmore Leonard book that you had read?
No.
And what was the first Elmore book that you'd read, and like what was it? And maybe it was a different book, but was there like a book that was like, all right, I got to pay attention to what this guy's doing?
It might have been 52 Pickup because I was a fan of the movie.
Interesting.
Because I really loved Clarence Williams III. I thought he was really great in 52 Pickup. And
Scary.
I liked him in the Mod Squad.
Yeah.
So that may have been my first, or maybe Freaky Deaky. But no, it wasn't. And look, we developed others that didn't get made. I tried for a long time to get Gun Sights made as a television series.
Interesting.
And before he passed away, Elmore and I discussed Gun Sights. And it was him kind of doing his version. Every chapter is almost a Western, is influenced by Western movies that he loved, with a kind of Butch and Sundance wraparound to it. We could talk a little bit about Be Cool, which Scott turned down adapting, and Pete Steinfeld did a really good job. Scott didn't want to do it because he felt that Chile was not the driving active force in it.
Mm-hmm.
He was sort of the calm in the eye of a hurricane with stuff going on all around him.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to watch Elmore's process because that's a book that followed the success of the movie. And he first attempted to write Chile in the fashion business.
Yeah.
And then abandoned it because Greg's research didn't give him enough crime element in the modern record business for him to tap into. So then they started doing a bunch of research. I feel like I introduced the two of them to Rick Rubin, and they followed him around for a little bit, and a few other people. Yeah, that's how that came to be. And the song that Christina Milian performs in that movie was written by a then unsigned John Legend.
Oh my gosh. So basically you helped introduce him to the music world, and did he keep you posted on his progress? Was he like sort of telling you about it, and the plan was always for you to do the movie as well?
Yeah, for all of us to do the movie.
I think there's a lot of great parts of Be Cool, but I don't think it's Get Shorty.
I would agree.
Few movies are. Was there a moment where you knew that it wasn't going to be, or?
Yeah, I think it was really, look, I think people don't understand, and I think F. Gary Gray's a really talented filmmaker, and there are things that he particularly brought to it sensibility-wise, like the humor of Cedric the Entertainer and his group that Andre Benjamin from Outkast are in, and all of the authenticity of the music videos and all of that stuff and the humor of Dwayne Johnson and Vince Vaughn, two people who were not the giant stars that they are today, and the fact that Dwayne agreed to essentially parody his persona to that time period was incredible.
Yeah.
But I think what Barry was able to do in weaving together the crime story with the comedy and the rest and the movie story, so that they were all working on equal footing, I think just wasn't as balanced in Be Cool. I think the Russians were tough to track. They sometimes were cartoony. The Russian mob that are in Be Cool, some of that comes from the book and the source material. Some of that comes from the collection of elements, but it's super watchable. And, Vince and Dwayne are as funny as anything that you could ever watch. And this was Vince before The Wedding Crashers came out.
Right.
And John and Uma are great together. Sergio Mendes is in the movie with the Black Eyed Peas. We had a lot of fun making it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great group of people. And sometimes sometimes even though it's a good movie, it's not a classic movie. But I will say that it's highly watchable and super entertaining, and I think was very harshly judged because it was being held up to a classic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a first too. And you can't take away the fact that it was a first, and it was the first Elmore Leonard book to transcend being a book.
Yeah, I think it's unfair, and I think on its own, I think people would look at it differently.
Yep.
We sort of talked about this earlier, just in terms of like you're able to make any kind of movie or TV show, but is there something, like, I'm sure there's things that you're looking at that you may recognize as like, this is a great book, this is a great script, but it's not for me. Is there something that separates the projects that are for you from the ones that aren't, even if they're both excellent quality?
Yeah, I mean, I have to connect to the characters. I have to love something. Like, I have to want to look. It's hard to get a movie made. If you're lucky, from beginning to end, you can get it done in 2 years, and that's really just under 2 years is the fastest it's ever happened, right? You better love Erin Brockovich if you're going to take 5.5 years to get that movie made. Or, I mean, we are still slogging away developing Devil in the White City 15 years later, maybe longer. So it's a commitment, and it's not haphazard, like, let's throw it against the wall and see what sticks. That's never been that for me. Now, for a lot of people, they're in a volume business in that way. And sometimes I wish I could be more like that.
Yeah.
But I like what I like and connect to what I connect to. And usually it has to do with the characters. I'm genre agnostic. I'd never done a horror film till I made Heretic.
Which is fantastic.
And really the only sci-fi that I've done are real social science fiction, like what started as social science fiction in both of them, in Gattaca and Contagion. So, I'm character-driven, script-driven, and filmmaker-driven, and voice-driven. So I'm with. And okay, maybe now that I've been doing it for longer, I don't necessarily want to be in Detroit or Minnesota in the winter. So that has an influence. I think about where something's going to shoot, right? A little bit more than I ever did before. But yeah, I want to say kind of one description of Elmore's work that I think is one of the best ways that I've ever heard it described.
Yeah.
The critic David Anson called Elmore Jane Austen behind bars, because ultimately what he's doing are comedy of manners from people that you would not expect to have those kinds of rituals and rules of engagement. And I thought it was such a great description that I just really wanted to share it with you guys.
That is a fantastic description. And thank you for sharing that. Thank you for making all of the great things that you're making and that you've made. I think that a big reason we're doing the podcast is to help introduce this work, which I'm getting to go back and reread things that I haven't read for 15 years, and they still feel fresh and modern. And ultimately, like, these are stories about people and in, very interesting, unique situations, but they're all being human, and I think it'll always hold up. And as I think all of your films will hold up. And
Thank you.
We really appreciate you coming.
Thanks for having me.
The Elmore Leonard podcast is produced and edited by Judd Rubin. Music by Greg Ahee. Hosted by Judd Rubin and Alex Leonard. Executive produced by Peter Leonard. Copyright 2025, Elmore Leonard Inc. Please visit us at elmoreleonardofficial.com or send us an email at hello@the Elmore Leonard podcast.